Hello, everybody. I'm David Shaw, a continuing lecturer at UC Santa Cruz, and I've titled my talk, We Are Wiser Together, Intergenerational Collaboration for the Common Good. And I'm going to begin with a little background about myself and then move into the power of conversation and then segue into this sweet spot around intergenerational conversation and intergenerational collaboration and some examples of how I've used that in the fields of sustainability and climate change. So, first, my background. So, like I said, I'm a continuing lecturer at UC Santa Cruz working in the social sciences, more specifically in the fields of sustainability, agroecology, human rights, communications, and community engagement. In 2012, I co-founded the UCSC Common Ground Center, which is to marry social justice and sustainability. And I also run a business called Santa Cruz Permaculture. So as an undergraduate at UCSC in 2000 to 2004, I studied grassroots community organizing through the Community Studies Department. And through my studies, I really saw some great examples and read a lot about the labor movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement, the civil rights movement, and some great examples of bottom-up community participation. However, the student movements I was a part of at the time on campus, including the burgeoning student sustainability movement in California, tended to use some very traditional facilitation processes. There were passionate facilitators taking responsibility to call meetings and really drive the process. And they were usually really based in whole group conversations with very little in the way of small group conversation. And in many cases, there was an unstated assumption that we all needed to sort of talk as much as was needed in order to get organized and go out and create stuff, or basically stop talking and get to work. But in 2005, a postdoc at our campus farm, Phil Howard, who's now a faculty member at Michigan State, introduced me to two participant-driven group processes, open space technology and the World Cafe. These processes changed my worldview about facilitation because they really integrated both small and large group work and were based on participants demonstrating passion and then taking responsibility in order to move the conversation forward. So it felt very natural, just like a conversation, but things all of a sudden were getting done with much more ease and grace. And as a facilitator, I really appreciated that. So I began to understand that these processes are based on at least three very different assumptions than standard, facilitation, business meetings, and whatnot. One is that people have unique gifts to bring forward, and that the social ecology of groups and societies are more resilient and durable when people are active contributors more so than passive consumers. And that's kind of obvious, but just wanted to state that in these processes, there's an assumption that people have gifts, and it's the facilitator's role to help that ecology emerge. Two, that conversation is how humans have created everything in our world. And if you think about it, everything starts as an idea and then is shared through conversations with others. If enough people like the idea and sign on to it, then it gets built in the physical world. And so you might think that we are sort of like fish swimming in water, but we're swimming in conversation every day. That's a real perspective shift, for me at least. That was when I first got that conversations really matter. That you can have one conversation with somebody and forever change their life, or vice versa. So three then is that when groups of people come together to define and host the conversations that matter to them, the world moves. It's like that Margaret Mead quote that says, "Never doubt a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So I could not agree more with that. In fact, I would say there's many examples of that in revolutionary studies. The Russian Soviets, the French salons, the pubs in old America here. and many, many other examples. It's small groups of people getting together that then ripple out into larger and larger national or international conversations. And so I began to see that a conversation is an action. And it's not that we need to stop talking and get to work, but rather see conversation as the core process driving value creation in learning, in business, in personal relationships, and in human society at large. So to make a long story short, I fell in love with these processes, as you can tell, and began hosting in a wide variety of settings. I'm now on the Global World Cafe Stewardship Council to help nurture a culture of dialogue as a means of large systems change. So I just wanted to share my bias about that. And you can certainly contact me if you want to become involved in the World Cafe. So now I want to segue and transition into the main subject of this talk, which is around intergenerational collaboration for the common good. So over my years of hosting conversations, I began to notice a particular sweet spot that when people of different ages and stages truly listen to one another and contribute their unique life experiences, a certain wisdom and active hope can emerge that I believe holds a key to solving some of the greatest challenges we face today. I'd like to quote an article from my colleagues Ashley Cooper and Marge Schiller, and they say, elders possess a broad experience of successes and failures, financial resources, contact networks, an understanding of political landscape, and disposition for maintaining a long-term outlook. Younger generations possess the vigor, passion, and zeal so vital for making things happen, an interest to learn and find purpose, the desire to change things, just about anything really, and a refreshing ability to broach topics made taboo or ignored by elders. So while this may be true, we also don't want to stereotype. None of us really likes to be put in boxes. So the classic assumption, elders have the wisdom and the youth have the vigor is not always true. I have seen many, many older adults who are as curious and with boundless energy as anybody I've ever met, and youngers who have the wisdom of today that is relevant, intelligent, and is really new knowledge that makes a vital contribution. So it's not just this elders have the wisdom and youngers have the vitality that we so often hear about. And in fact, I would say that's quite an oppressive assumption that is very limiting. So I want to invite us to maybe take a little bit closer look at some of these other assumptions that are quite pervasive. So there's this prevailing view I talked about with vitality, idealism, and energy. The purview of the younger generation, I would say it can be accessed by any stage of life. Wisdom and experience are the purview of the older generation. No, it can be accessed by any stage or age of a person's life. Another one is that the older people are teachers and mentors and younger people are the students and learners, that older adults need to transfer their knowledge into youngers about how things work. And I'd like to introduce the concept or the term co-mentor, that older and younger people can co-mentor each other using our unique contributions to co-evolve innovation and adapt new systems to current and future challenges. Another assumption is that people in their sort of 30s to 60s, those are the productive years of one's life, and that the youngers and elders are less relevant. And I would say that we are one generation alive together, whatever our age or stage, and that we really need the participation and gifts of everybody alive. Another one is that naming and categorizing generations can inform how we understand and manage each other, like the baby boomers and the millennials and Gen X. And I would say that true collaboration and partnership requires authentic conversation and engagement beyond the stereotypes and norms. And I'd say, in my own personal life experience, that's really been true, where when I have a friend of another age or life stage, we kind of drop the age thing and it just becomes friendship, and we turn to one another for our diverse experiences, not so much that there's more or less of them, just that they're different. Another assumption is my generation knows best, young buck, old buck sort of stuff. And this one comes back to curiosity, I would say. The emerging worldview is that it's not so much that one generation, knows better or had things better or worse, but that we need to have curiosity and respect. And that when those are there, we can innovate new possibilities. Another really key one is that past family or other intergenerational experiences will color one's future relationships. If you have a hard family background, that'll change how you interact with older or younger people as you move forward in life. And there's a real possibility for healing there, and forgiveness, that safe, hospitable spaces which foster mutual compassion, forgiveness, love, and healing can help form new habits of the heart. And then lastly, I'd like to say that it's this passing the baton prevailing worldview that, our generation tried this in the 60s and 70s. I hear this all the time. And now it's time for your generation to pick it up. And we've tried, and I'm sorry we failed. And here you go. And I would say, and I could see my generation saying that to the next generation in the coming years. However, our challenges are at the scale and have been around for so long that they cannot be solved just by the younger generations alone. We need to evolve a culture of shared responsibility and investment for our common futures, as long as any of us are part of this circle of life. The future of our species and this planet depends on all of us working in partnership across boundaries of age and stage. So those are some of the prevailing and emerging worldviews as we're dancing with this thing we call Wiser Together. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but I'm reading off of our website, wiser-together.com, which is a collaboratory of those of us who have realized we are wiser together across generations. It's a group of us from the World Cafe Community Foundation and other places. Over the years, we have distilled a set of guiding principles that we're still actually working on. So this is at the edge of our research. And I want to just start to state some of these principles that we are finding are more or less universally applicable, whether you're designing a dialogue or you're designing a board of directors or you're designing a conference. These are principles to add value to your initiative, and in particular to help them be more intergenerational. And so the first is to invite and honor unique contributions. So to invite personal storytelling, to do some community asset mapping, to see what unique contributions are in the room and how to bring those forward. Because there are some real patterns around people having unique contributions that are based on age, and we want those to come forward. We want to really leverage and synergize those contributions, because when people see that we are wiser together, we are stronger together through our connections across age and stage, there will be a natural inclination to want to do more of that. The second principle is to foster real partnerships, to shift the traditional mindsets and assumptions around hierarchy and stereotype, which can kind of keep us stuck and unproductive. So build multi-generational teams, say who is 10 years younger, who's 10 years older, or 20 years or 30 years in each direction, and to try to really have that team, and not from a passing down the torch sort of thing, or looking to, be riding on somebody's wings, but really, through partnership and friendship. And use, in that fostering of partnerships, use dialogue methods to uncover hidden assumptions and let those be part of the learning. So, and also another real piece around fostering partnerships is to identify the issues of common concern, and to try to find shared practical action to, really discover what people are caring about across generations and let that be the guiding force. Third, to design innovative experiments, to really see these intergenerational collaborations as learning opportunities and experiments. So practicing participatory action research, using collaborative online tools to experiment across networks, to create multi-generational storytelling around key projects to see what stories people have around these issues of common concern, but really to design them as innovative experiments and then see what you can learn from them and then share that out with the world. Next, create safe and inclusive spaces. So again, using proven practices and dialogue processes. And then also really trying to create hospitable spaces, food, body embodiment practices, mindfulness practices, things that are nourishing of the spirit. There is a tendency with some people to kind of go, especially in academia, and that can really turn off a lot of people and create sort of distance. And so as we're weaving in more inclusive intergenerational spaces, let's really think about hospitality and the art of hosting. Really, how would you design this space if you're hosting a dinner party? It turns out we learn a lot through play and retain a lot of knowledge when our minds are at ease, which is kind of counter to a lot of the academic spaces we create. And so if it were true that through play and hospitable space we actually learned better and formed deeper relationships, how might that change how we create our teaching environments and our conferences? How might that inform the burgeoning climate justice movement? Social movements as if people mattered, I guess. Next principle is use creative ways of learning and working together. So again, music, movement, art, poetry, silence, creative expression, engaging the natural world as an ally. Next, cultivating meaningful friendships. So sharing meals, again, storytelling, inquiring about one another's dilemmas and concerns. And then the next principle, learn together, harvest insights, and share discoveries. This is about the power of documentation in both face-to-face and virtual gatherings. So trying to do graphic recording and short videos and different ways to sort of spread this meme of intergenerational collaboration. Creating multi-generational ambassadors who really believe in this work and, cross-pollinating into different spaces. And then the last principle we have is sharing the stories of the past and developing the stories of our future. This is about an active imagination. When people have these really rich village building learning experiences across generations, it's good to analyze and question what really happened here. And then to, ask that question, what if together we blank? What if together we created a future together? What if together we did this project together? What does that story look like? So those are the principles we have at the moment. And now I want to transition into the closing part of my talk here, which is to talk about 4 case studies. So the first is a UC Santa Cruz World Cafe. I coordinate the UC Santa Cruz Right Livelihood College, which is a partnership with the Right Livelihood Award Foundation, alternatively known, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. In February of 2015, we hosted Bill McKibben, who is a recipient of the award via video conference, to give a keynote talk and then had a World Cafe. We were fortunate enough to have a budget to hire a professional graphic recorder, Paula Hansen, and we also were fortunate enough to have a budget to pay for free food for people. And so we had about 100 students, community members, faculty members at this World Cafe. And we had the keynote talk with Bill McKibben and then some practices from Joanna Macy's The Work That Reconnects to really elicit an emotional response after Bill sort of laid it down about the perils and possibilities of climate change, but also the act of hope. We wanted to have a participatory sort of embodied experience. And then we had a 90-minute World Cafe with dinner following. And for me, the main takeaway and powerful moment was um, when some older adults, without being prompted, grabbed the microphone and said, youngers, we are so sorry for this world that we are leaving for you. Could you ever forgive us? We've tried our best, and now it's your turn. And the students stood up, and without me prompting them in any way, they said, no, let's hold this torch together. You're still here. You're active. You're here today, right? You cared enough to come to this conversation. We forgive you, and more than forgive you, we need you. Let's go. And there was this really sweet healing that I'm sure moved many people and was a very memorable moment for everybody involved. So that was a Sweet World Cafe in February of 2015. Also in February of 2015 was this World Cafe that I hosted with the California Student Sustainability Coalition, which is a nonprofit that started in 2003. I was involved back in those early years with this burgeoning student sustainability movement. And despite the name, I was curious to see how the organization might be enhanced through greater intergenerational collaboration, and was on the board of directors for 2 years and sort of had that question that I brought forward to the board. Even though it's the California Student Sustainability Coalition, how might those students lead the way in an intergenerational collaboration? Since I would say, that's one of the gifts that a lot of millennials and post-millennials have is this collaborative mindset. And so at our winter leadership meeting, we had a World Cafe where we invited the larger community. And this was around San Luis Obispo in February of 2015. And we had an excellent World Cafe with about 60, 75 people, about 30 of which were from the community and older adults. And there was a real sense of power through that intergenerational dialogue, and a lot of sort of opening up of perspectives and hope that was created. Both hope that, oh my God, there's really cool older adults that want to be involved in this student sustainability movement here. But also, oh my God, there's all these younger people that are actually taking action and aren't apathetic and are really getting organized. It feels like the 60s again. But it didn't really stick, I would say. One of the learnings there for me was that we really need to identify particular people and particular projects to take on in order for things to root. People need to become friends and want to do a project together. It was kind of more generic and general. And I would say, it's best to define a project as intergenerational from the get-go when it's being formed. It's a little harder to shift something that's so youth-focused into a more intergenerational sphere. It's certainly possible, but I would say a major function of the California Student Sustainability Coalition is really social, to provide a place for youth to empower themselves. And it's less so maybe about a whole systems approach to really getting things done and looking at all the ins and outs of what a climate justice movement might look like. It's more sort of youth-led. And in that very social, and a space for sort of becoming and creating an identity, especially a political identity, which is very powerful and useful. Another cafe is at the National Bioneers Conference. So every October, I host a series of dialogues at the National Bioneers Conference in San Rafael. And then in 2015, I was fortunate enough to host a conversation with my elder and teacher, Joanna Macy. And we had a wonderful conversation with about 120 people. And then she did a keynote, and then we had a World Cafe. And at the end of the World Cafe, there was a young man who was a former student of mine at UCSC who grabbed the mic, and he started talking about what I would call young people's oppression. We've talked about ageism, and all heard about ageism, obviously, which I would define as the oppression of older adults. And yet I would define the oppression of youngers as young people's oppression, as a very different yet related form of oppression. And they started just saying all these things that they're tired of hearing. And then that naturally segued into this question of what would you love to hear? And it was just this really beautiful, emergent conversation. And again, it was a cause for a lot of healing and open-mindedness about what we could give to one another across generations. The last example I'd like to share is from August 2016 at the National Positive Aging Conference. And so this is in Washington, D.C., and it's a national conference focused on aging. And so there's mostly older adults, and we invited many youngers to join us for this 2.5-hour World Cafe. And given that group, I really wanted to follow up on this question around what would you like to never hear or feel again? And also, what would you love to hear or feel from another generation? And there were many beautiful things said, lots of healing. One was, what we'd like to never hear again is, are you still dyeing your hair? Are you still working on this thing? Are you still doing these things? Are you stuck, as a young person or as an older person? Another thing was, all young people want instant results, or are always on their phones, or so fast and technology driven, and or you are too old to be in this conversation, or we don't need you. Stereotyping. Things that people would love to hear more is, let's do something together, or I need you, or would you please tell me your story, or how can I help you, or I want to be involved in that thing that you care a lot about. So you can really hear some patterns there, I hope. So I'd just like to wrap it up here. Thank you for your time. I just want to iterate my main points. That first, conversation really matters. It may just seem like talking, but in fact, it's through conversation that we've created our world, including these messes that we're in. Second, there's great healing and possibility when we come together across our generational divides. We can see this in personal and professional arenas, as well as in social movement building. There's a critical mass of people taking action, yet we are really isolated across the generations. And so we need collective solutions to solve our collective problems, not just individual solutions from one group or generation. And third and lastly, there are easy to apply processes for intergenerational dialogue that could be applied in your community should you find this as a valuable potential. You can contact me if you're interested. Thank you so much for your time.